My name is Bernadette, and at 62 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of heartbreak life could throw at me. Nothing, however, prepared me for losing my son Michael in a car accident 6 months ago. Living with my daughter-in-law Ashley and 8-year-old grandson Tommy in our suburban Ohio home, I believed we were supporting each other through our shared grief. But things hadn't been the same since the funeral, and a quiet desperation had settled over our household, like morning fog that never lifts. Before I share what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if this story touches your heart. Now let me tell you about the day my world turned upside down all over again. Life before February 15th had been everything I could have hoped for as a mother and grandmother. Michael, my only child, had grown into a remarkable man. At 32, he worked as a construction foreman for Henderson Building Company, the same firm where he'd started as a summer laborer during high school. His hands were always rough from honest work, but his heart was gentle enough to cradle a butterfly. 5 years ago, Michael married Ashley, a dental hygienist, with bright blue eyes and an infectious laugh that filled our house with joy. They'd moved into my 2-story colonial home on Maple Street, the same house where I'd raised Michael after his father died when he was just 12. The arrangement worked beautifully. Michael insisted on paying the mortgage while I contributed my Social Security and small pension from my years working at the county clerk's office toward utilities and groceries. Tommy arrived 3 years into their marriage, a perfect blend of his parents' best features. Michael's dark hair and my stubborn chin, Ashley's bright eyes and quick wit. That boy became the center of our universe, and Michael proved to be the father I'd always known he would be. Every evening after work, no matter how exhausted, Michael would spend hours teaching Tommy to throw a baseball or helping with homework at the kitchen table. The night of February 15th started like any other winter evening. Michael called from the job site around 5:30 to say he'd be late due to a concrete delivery delay. Ashley was working late at Dr. Morrison's dental practice, so I picked up Tommy from after-school care and helped him with his math homework. We were making grilled cheese sandwiches when the doorbell rang at 8:47. I'll never forget that time because the kitchen clock chimed just as Officer Martinez stepped onto our front porch. The snowstorm had turned Highway 22 into a sheet of ice. Michael's truck had skidded into oncoming traffic while he was rushing home to us. The other driver, a college student texting on her phone, walked away without a scratch. Michael died instantly, they assured me, as if that somehow made the loss more bearable. Ashley's grief manifested differently than mine. Where I found solace in memories and keeping Michael's presence alive through stories and photographs, she seemed determined to pack away every reminder of him. Within 2 weeks of the funeral, she'd boxed up his clothes and moved his tools to the garage. I understood everyone grieves differently, so I bit my tongue and focused on helping Tommy navigate his confusion and anger. My role became crucial in those early months. While Ashley threw herself into work, often staying late or picking up weekend shifts, I became Tommy's constant companion. I walked him to school each morning, attended his soccer games, and sat with him during the nightmares that plagued him for weeks after losing his daddy. Tommy and I developed our own routine of making pancakes every Saturday morning while sharing stories about his father's childhood adventures. Initially, Ashley expressed genuine gratitude for my support. She'd hug me after particularly difficult days and tell me how much she appreciated having me there for Tommy. But something shifted in recent weeks. The hugs became brief and distant. Our conversations grew shorter and more businesslike. Ashley started making comments about moving forward and creating new memories that made my stomach churn with unease. The house felt different too. There was a tension that hadn't existed before, like everyone was walking on eggshells. Ashley received late-night phone calls that she'd take in her bedroom with the door closed. Sometimes I'd hear her laughing in a way that reminded me of the old Ashley, but it felt wrong somehow too soon after Michael's death. Tommy sensed the change too, asking me why Mommy seemed so different and whether we were still a family. 3 weeks before everything fell apart, Ashley came home from work with a brightness in her eyes that I hadn't seen since before Michael's accident. She hummed while making dinner and spent extra time getting ready in the mornings. When I asked if something good had happened at work, she just smiled and said she was finally feeling like herself again. That weekend, she introduced us to Derek Patterson, a dental technician from Dr. Morrison's office. Derek was Ashley's age, with carefully styled blonde hair and a smile that seemed practiced rather than genuine. He showed up Saturday afternoon carrying flowers for Ashley and a baseball glove for Tommy, as if he were auditioning for the role of replacement father. Tommy accepted the glove politely, but later told me privately that it felt wrong to play catch with someone who wasn't his daddy. I watched from the kitchen window as Derek tried too hard to connect with my grandson, talking loudly about sports and video games, while Tommy responded with one-word answers and frequent glances toward the house. Ashley's behavior around Derek made my chest tight with worry. She laughed too loudly at his jokes and touched his arm constantly during conversation. When Derek stayed for dinner, he sat in Michael's chair at the head of our dining room table without being invited. Nobody said anything, but Tommy kept staring at that chair like he couldn't understand how someone else could just take his father's place. Derek's attitude toward me was cordial but dismissive, like I was a piece of furniture he had to work around. He'd nod politely when I spoke, but never engaged in actual conversation. During dinner, he made comments about young families needing their space and starting fresh after tragedy that felt pointed and uncomfortable. One evening the following week, I returned from grocery shopping earlier than expected and overheard Ashley and Derek talking in the living room. Their voices carried down the hallway as I put away the milk and eggs. Derek was saying something about the living situation and how it wasn't sustainable long term. Ashley's response chilled me to the bone. "I know," she said quietly. "Maybe it's time for some changes around here." I made noise putting away the groceries so they'd know I was home, but the conversation had already shifted to safer topics. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom I'd occupied for over 20 years, wondering if I'd misunderstood what I'd heard. But deep in my heart, I knew exactly what they'd been discussing. Over the next several days, I caught glimpses of Ashley looking at her computer screen and quickly closing windows when I entered the room. One afternoon, while she was at work, I noticed she'd left papers scattered on the kitchen counter. My blood ran cold when I saw brochures for senior living communities scattered among bills and grocery lists. Sunset Manor, Golden Years Assisted Living, Peaceful Acres Retirement Community. Each brochure featured smiling elderly people engaged in activities like pottery classes and garden clubs. But all I could see were strangers living out their final years away from family, away from Tommy, away from the home I'd shared with my son. When I tried to bring up my concerns with Ashley, she deflected with comments about being busy at work or needing to focus on Tommy's needs. But I could see the calculation in her eyes the way she measured her words carefully. She was planning something, and I was increasingly certain that something didn't include me. Sleep became elusive as I wondered how long I had before Ashley made her move. I'd contributed financially to this household for years, but the house was in Michael's name, which meant it now belonged to Ashley. Legally, I had no claim to the home where I'd raised my son and was now raising his child. The realization of my vulnerability hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless with fear about an uncertain future. The morning of March 22nd started like any other Wednesday. I made coffee and helped Tommy get ready for school, while Ashley rushed around gathering her things for work. She seemed unusually energetic, almost excited about something. Derek had started staying over occasionally, and that morning he emerged from Ashley's bedroom looking smug and self-satisfied. After Ashley dropped Tommy at school, she returned home within an hour, which was unusual since her shift didn't end until 5. She wasn't alone. Derek followed her through the front door, carrying a manila folder and wearing the kind of serious expression people adopt when conducting business. "Bernadette," Ashley called from the living room, her voice carrying an artificial cheerfulness that made my stomach clench. "We need to talk about your future." I found them sitting together on the sofa, Derek's arm possessively across Ashley's shoulders. The manila folder lay open on the coffee table, revealing official-looking documents with legal letterhead. Ashley gestured for me to sit in the armchair across from them, the same chair where Michael used to read bedtime stories to Tommy. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Michael died." Ashley began, her tone businesslike and rehearsed. "About what's best for everyone involved, especially Tommy. Derek and I have been discussing our future together, and we've decided we need space to build our relationship without complications." The word complications hit me like a slap. 6 months of helping raise her son, contributing to household expenses, and providing emotional support during the darkest period of our lives, and I was now a complication. Derek leaned forward, his voice patronizing, as he explained how they'd researched appropriate living situations for someone in my demographic. He spoke about me as if I weren't sitting 3 feet away discussing my age and financial limitations like I was a problem to be solved, rather than a human being with feelings and rights. Ashley's delivery of the crushing blow was methodical and cold. "I need you to find somewhere else to live within 30 days. I've looked into several facilities that would be perfect for someone your age. Sunset Manor has activities and meal plans, and you'd have people your own age to socialize with." The cruelty of her timing struck me like a physical blow. 6 months and 7 days after my son's funeral, his widow was telling me I was no longer welcome in the home where I'd lived for 23 years. The home where Michael took his first steps. The home where he'd brought Ashley as his bride. The home where Tommy had been born into a family that was supposed to love and protect each other. "Michael's gone, Bernadette." Ashley continued, her voice taking on an edge when she saw my shocked expression. "I'm not responsible for taking care of you. I have to think about my future, and Tommy's future now." Derek's presence during this conversation felt calculated and cruel. His barely concealed satisfaction was evident in the way he squeezed Ashley's shoulder and nodded approvingly at her words. This man who'd known my grandson for 3 weeks was sitting in my living room while my daughter-in-law dismantled the only family Tommy had left. When I tried to speak to ask about Tommy and how this would affect him, Ashley cut me off with a threat that left me speechless. "If you make this difficult, it's going to affect how much you see Tommy. Derek and I are planning to create a stable, loving home for him, and we can't have outside interference disrupting that process." The implication was clear. Agree to leave quietly or risk losing my grandson entirely. The woman who'd once called me mom and thanked me for welcoming her into our family was now using my love for Tommy as leverage to force me from my home. I retreated to my bedroom, closing the door behind me with trembling hands. The familiar space that had been my sanctuary for over 2 decades suddenly felt foreign and temporary. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the photograph of Michael on my nightstand, and wondered how his wife could honor his memory by destroying the family he'd loved so deeply. Phone calls to my sister Margaret in Florida revealed my limited options. Margaret's retirement community had a waiting list, and she was struggling financially herself after her husband's recent medical bills. My savings account held barely enough to cover first month's rent and security deposits somewhere, assuming I could even find an apartment that would accept a senior citizen on a fixed income. That night, lying in my bed, for what felt like it might be one of the last times, something shifted inside me. The initial shock and hurt began transforming into something stronger and more determined. Michael hadn't raised me to be a victim, and he certainly hadn't raised his son to watch his grandmother be discarded like unwanted furniture. 2 days after Ashley's ultimatum, I was helping Tommy with his 3rd-grade math homework when I noticed he seemed distracted and upset. He kept glancing toward his mother's closed bedroom door, where Ashley and Derek were having what sounded like an important discussion based on their hushed but intense voices. "Tommy," I said, gently setting down his pencil and giving him my full attention. "Is something bothering you, sweetheart?" He fidgeted with his eraser for a long moment before looking up at me with eyes that held too much worry for an 8-year-old boy. "Grandma Bernadette, are you going to leave me too?" The question broke my heart, but his next words shattered it completely. Between sniffles and stammered explanations, Tommy confessed that he'd been hiding outside his mother's bedroom door the night before, listening to Ashley and Derek discuss their plans. What he'd overheard changed everything I thought I knew about Ashley's motivations. Tommy told me that Ashley and Derek weren't planning to stay in our house. They were discussing selling it and moving to Derek's condominium across town. Ashley had been researching the property value and meeting with real estate agents while claiming she needed space to build a life with Derek in our family home. "Mommy said something about insurance money," Tommy whispered, his voice breaking. "And Derek said, once you were gone, they'd have everything to themselves. Grandma, I don't want you to go away like Daddy did." The pieces of Ashley's deception began falling into place like dominoes. She wasn't trying to build a future in our home. She was planning to cash in on Michael's death and start over somewhere else. My eviction wasn't about space or new beginnings. It was about eliminating the one person who might question her decisions or stand up for Tommy's right to stability and connection to his father's memory. While Ashley and Derek went out for dinner that evening, leaving Tommy with me as usual, I conducted a careful investigation of Ashley's recent activities. Her purse, usually guarded closely, sat open on the kitchen counter, with papers spilling out. Among the receipts and appointment cards, I found a business card for Henderson Real Estate and a note with figures that represented our home's estimated market value. Tommy led me to his mother's computer, which she'd left open in her rush to get ready for her date with Derek. Her browsing history revealed extensive research on property sales condo listings in Derek's neighborhood, and most damning of all, articles about inheritance rights and life insurance benefits for surviving spouses. In Ashley's email account, which Tommy knew the password to from helping her with online shopping, I discovered correspondence with Michael's life insurance company. The policy I'd thought would secure Tommy's future education was being liquidated for immediate payout. Ashley had already received $150,000 money that was meant to ensure my grandson's stability after losing his father. More disturbing were the text message exchanges between Ashley and Derek that painted a picture of cold calculation rather than grief-stricken decision-making. Derek had written, "Once the old lady is gone, we'll have everything to ourselves. No more walking on eggshells or pretending to care about her feelings." Ashley's response was even more chilling. "She'll be out by the end of the month. Tommy will adjust once she's not around to remind him of the past. Kids are resilient." They were discussing my grandson like he was an obstacle to overcome rather than a grieving child who needed stability and love. The woman who'd promised Michael she'd always love his family was planning to erase us both from Tommy's life for financial gain and personal convenience. I photographed everything with my old digital camera, careful to return each item to its exact location. Tommy watched with wide eyes as I documented evidence of his mother's betrayal, understanding more than a child should about adult deception and greed. That night, after Tommy fell asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and began writing down every detail of what I'd discovered. Michael had always taught me that knowledge was power, but only if you knew how to use it effectively. For the first time since Ashley's ultimatum, I felt something other than helpless despair. The next morning, while Ashley was at work and Tommy was at school, I drove to the downtown legal aid office where Michael's best friend Carlos worked as a paralegal. Carlos had been like a brother to Michael since high school, and he'd remained close to our family even after Michael's death. If anyone would help me navigate this situation, it would be him. Carlos listened to my story with growing anger and disbelief. "Bernadette," he said, shaking his head as I showed him the photographs of Ashley's emails and documents. "This isn't just morally wrong. Some of what Ashley's doing might be illegal." He explained that elder financial abuse was a serious crime, especially when it involved forged documents or misrepresentation of assets. More importantly, Carlos revealed something that changed everything. Michael had mentioned wanting to add my name to the house deed to protect my security in case anything happened to him. He came in here about 2 months before the accident, Carlos said, pulling out a file folder. He wanted to make sure you'd always have a place to live. We discussed several options, but he said he wanted to talk to Ashley about it first since it would affect her inheritance rights. The timing made perfect sense. Michael had been acting more serious and thoughtful in the weeks before his death, making comments about taking care of business and making sure everyone was protected. I'd assumed he was talking about his life insurance policy, and while not realizing he'd been considering additional protections for me. Carlos introduced me to Sarah Walsh, a family lawyer who specialized in elder rights and estate disputes. Sarah reviewed my evidence with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen similar cases before. Ashley's forged signature on documents transferring joint accounts to her sole name was clearly fraudulent. The misappropriation of life insurance funds that were meant to benefit Tommy constituted financial abuse. The text messages alone show intent to defraud and conspiracy, Sarah explained. But we need more evidence to build a strong case. Are you willing to do some careful investigating? Over the next week, I became a detective in my own home. I documented Ashley's financial activities, photographed suspicious documents, and carefully recorded conversations where she discussed her plans with Derek. Tommy, understanding that we were trying to protect our family, helped by reporting conversations he overheard and alerting me when Ashley left papers accessible. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had noticed Derek loading items from our garage into his truck on several occasions when Ashley was supposedly at work. When I asked her to check her security camera footage, we discovered Derek had been systematically removing Michael's tools and equipment items that legally belonged to Tommy as Michael's heir. The postal worker, Jim Rodriguez, confirmed that Ashley had been intercepting mail addressed to me, including statements from the account where I direct deposited my Social Security checks. Ashley had been monitoring my finances and limiting my access to information about my own money. Carlos helped me request copies of financial records that revealed the full extent of Ashley's deception. She'd been systematically draining the household account that I'd been contributing to for months, transferring funds to personal accounts that Derek also had access to. The money I'd been providing for groceries and utilities was instead funding their dinner dates and weekend trips. Most damaging was the discovery that Ashley had contacted my doctor's office claiming to be my daughter and requesting information about my mental capacity and health status. She'd been building a case to have me declared incompetent, which would have given her legal grounds to make decisions about my living situation and finances. Sarah assured me that we had more than enough evidence to stop Ashley's plan and potentially have her charged with elder abuse and fraud. But she warned that fighting back would be emotionally difficult and might temporarily disrupt Tommy's life. Your grandson needs to know that someone is willing to fight for what's right, Sarah said. Children learn from watching how adults handle injustice. Do you want Tommy to learn that bullies always win, or that sometimes good people have to stand up and fight back? Ashley chose Friday, March 30th to present me with official eviction papers exactly 30 days after her initial ultimatum. She'd arranged for Derek to be present, clearly expecting their united front to intimidate me into compliance. They entered the house with the swagger of people who believed they held all the power. I'd spent the morning preparing for this confrontation, dressing carefully in the navy blue dress I'd worn to church with Michael every Sunday, and arranging the evidence I'd gathered in neat folders on the dining room table. When Ashley called for me to join them in the living room, I calmly requested that we all sit down together in the dining room instead. I have some things I'd like to share with both of you, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Ashley and Derek exchanged confused glances but followed me to the table where Michael's high school graduation photos smiled down at us from the buffet. Ashley began her rehearsed speech about final arrangements and moving deadlines, but I held up my hand to stop her. Before you continue, I think you should see what I've discovered about your plans for this family's future. I opened the first folder and spread out printed copies of Ashley's text messages with Derek. The color drained from both their faces as they realized I had documentation of their private conversations about eliminating me and cashing in on Michael's death. Derek immediately tried to distance himself from the situation. "Now wait a minute," he stammered. "Those messages are taken out of context. We never meant anything malicious." But I was just getting started. The second folder contained evidence of Ashley's financial fraud, forged signatures, unauthorized account transfers, and misappropriation of Tommy's inheritance money. Ashley's confident demeanor crumbled as she realized the depth of my investigation. "You've been stealing from the household account I contribute to," I said calmly. "You've been intercepting my mail and attempting to access my medical records without permission. Most importantly, you've been planning to sell this house and move Tommy away from everything that connects him to his father's memory." Ashley's desperate attempts at denial grew weaker with each piece of evidence I presented. The real estate consultation papers, the correspondence with life insurance companies, the security camera footage of Derek removing Michael's tools from the garage. At exactly 11:30 as planned, the doorbell rang. Officer Williams from the local police department and Janet Martinez, a social worker specializing in elder abuse cases, stood on our front porch with official documents of their own. "Mrs. Patterson called us," Officer Williams explained to a shocked Ashley. "She's filed a complaint for elder financial abuse and fraud. We need to discuss these allegations and examine the evidence that's been presented." Ashley's final desperate move was to threaten my relationship with Tommy, claiming that my vindictive behavior proved I was an unfit guardian figure. But this backfired spectacularly when Tommy himself appeared in the dining room doorway, having been quietly listening from the kitchen. "Mommy," he said, his 8-year-old voice carrying more moral authority than any adult in the room. "Why did you want to make Grandma Bernadette go away? She takes care of me when you're working, and she makes me feel better when I miss Daddy." Derek's cowardly abandonment of Ashley began immediately. As Officer Williams explained the potential charges Ashley was facing, Derek claimed he'd been misled about the situation and had no knowledge of any illegal activities. Within an hour, he'd removed his belongings from the house and blocked Ashley's phone number. The legal restraining order that Sarah had prepared protected my right to remain in the home while the investigation proceeded. Ashley was required to stay elsewhere until the criminal charges were resolved, taking only her personal belongings and leaving behind the life insurance money she'd planned to steal. As Ashley packed her suitcases that afternoon, supervised by Officer Williams to ensure she didn't remove anything that belonged to Tommy or me, she made one last attempt at manipulation. "You're destroying this family," she told me. "Tommy will never forgive you for this." But Tommy, wise beyond his years, responded before I could. "You're the one who wanted to send Grandma away," he said simply. "Daddy would be mad at you, not at her." 6 months later, as autumn painted our maple tree, the colors of Michael's favorite flannel shirt, Tommy and I had settled into routines that honored the past while embracing hope for the future. The house felt like home again, filled with the comfortable sounds of a grandmother and grandson learning to be a family in a new way. Tommy's healing had been gradual but steady. With consistent therapy sessions and the security of knowing I wasn't going anywhere, his nightmares decreased and his grades improved. We'd established new traditions that kept Michael's memory alive without dwelling in sadness. Saturday morning pancakes became Sunday afternoon cooking sessions where Tommy learned to make his father's favorite chili recipe. The financial stability of our household was restored through Ashley's court-ordered restitution payments. The life insurance money that should have secured Tommy's future was returned, placed in a trust fund that would pay for his education and provide security as he grew up. Ashley's fraudulent activities had resulted in criminal charges and a requirement to pay damages for the emotional distress she'd caused. My role in Tommy's life was now legally protected through the guardianship arrangement that Sarah had helped us establish. While Ashley retained certain parental rights, major decisions about Tommy's welfare and living situation required my input and approval. Tommy would never again face the uncertainty of losing the people he depended on. The house itself felt renewed rather than haunted. We'd rearranged furniture and redecorated Tommy's room with his input creating spaces that felt fresh while honoring the memories we treasured. Michael's workshop in the garage became a place where Tommy and I worked on projects together, learning to use tools that connected him to his father's legacy. My friendship with Carlos had deepened into something unexpected and beautiful. What began as gratitude for his legal help had grown into genuine companionship. Carlos understood grief and loss, having lost his own wife to cancer 3 years earlier. Our conversations over coffee helped us both heal while building something new and hopeful. The volunteer work I'd begun with the Elder Rights Coalition gave my life new purpose beyond caring for Tommy. Speaking to groups about recognizing signs of elder abuse, I found my voice in ways I'd never expected. Helping other families navigate legal complexities and emotional manipulation felt like honoring Michael's memory through service to others. Tommy's relationship with his father's memory had evolved in healthy ways. Instead of the confused anger he'd felt immediately after the accident, he now spoke about Michael with pride and affection. We visited Michael's grave together, monthly, bringing flowers and sharing stories about school and friends. Tommy often talked to his father about his dreams and problems, maintaining a connection that brought comfort rather than pain. The legal resolution of Ashley's case had been swift once the evidence was presented. Faced with overwhelming documentation of her fraud and abuse, she'd accepted a plea agreement that included restitution, community service, and probation. Derek had disappeared from her life entirely, leaving her to face the consequences of their schemes alone. Ashley's supervised visits with Tommy occurred twice monthly at a family services center. Initially awkward and tense, these meetings had gradually improved as Ashley was required to attend parenting classes and counseling. While our relationship might never be repaired, Tommy was learning to separate his love for his mother from disappointment in her choices. The neighborhood had rallied around us in ways that reminded me why Michael had loved this community. Mrs. Patterson continued to watch our house when we traveled, and other neighbors included Tommy in their children's activities and offered support when needed. The network of care that surrounded us felt like the extended family Michael had always wanted for his son. Looking back on those dark months, when I'd felt helpless and unwanted, I realized that fighting back had taught me lessons I'd never expected to learn at 62. Standing up for myself and for Tommy had required courage I didn't know I possessed, but it had also revealed strength that came from love rather than anger. The most profound change was in my understanding of what it meant to honor Michael's memory. Initially, I'd thought preserving his belongings and sharing stories about him was enough. But true honor came from protecting the values he'd lived by: family, loyalty, justice, and the belief that people should take care of each other rather than exploit vulnerability. Tommy's request that crisp October afternoon surprised me with its perfect timing. "Grandma Bernadette," he said, looking up from his homework with Michael's determined expression, "can we plant a garden next spring in memory of Daddy?" He always said he wanted to grow vegetables, but never had time. As we planned the garden that would bloom in our backyard come spring, I realized that Tommy understood something profound about healing and growth. You don't forget the people you've lost by moving forward. You honor them by planting new seeds in soil, enriched by love and memory, trusting that beautiful things can grow from the deepest grief. That night, as I tucked Tommy into bed and listened to his prayers that included thanks for Grandma staying forever and requests for his daddy to watch over our garden, I understood that sometimes the people who should protect us are the ones we need protection from. But I'd also learned that love gives ordinary people extraordinary courage when the stakes matter most. I'd fought for what Michael would have wanted, not what others decided I deserved. In doing so, I'd given Tommy something more valuable than money or property: the knowledge that family means standing up for each other, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. The future stretched ahead of us like an unplanted garden full of possibilities we'd nurture together. And for the first time since losing Michael, that future felt bright with promise rather than shadowed by loss. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to stand up to someone who was trying to take advantage of your grief or vulnerability? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video if my story touched your heart. Subscribe for more true stories about family resilience and the power of standing up for what's right. And please share this with anyone who might need to hear that it's never too late to fight back against injustice. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the strongest roots grow from the most broken ground. Until next time, may you find the courage to protect what matters most.